Good afternoon. I'll make a couple quick comments and then you can fire away on this or anything else. Obviously thrilled today to be signing into law the Foxconn Valley Special Session Bill number 1 that allows us to go forward with the deal that we announced earlier this summer that will really fulfill our promise to having thousands of good-paying, family-supporting jobs right here in southeastern Wisconsin, as well as the 10,000 jobs required to build this new ecosystem, and long-term, the thousands of jobs that will come from the $1.4 billion spent each year on supply chain right here in the state of Wisconsin. So we're absolutely thrilled to do that. It was great to have a good bipartisan representation of the members of the state legislature who voted for this legislation, to have good representation from folks, the local government throughout southeastern Wisconsin here with us today, and to have a great representation of both higher education and private sector employers, all of whom are thrilled, not only just that this new law is going into effect, but thrilled to be a part of Foxconn Valley going forward, knowing that this, again, is exactly what we've talked about for years. Thousands of good-paying, family-supporting jobs, doing so in a way that allows us to proudly make these new LCD panels here in the United States, specifically here in the state of Wisconsin, and with the Foxconn Valley concept of not just about jobs or a series of structures, but really about rebranding this state in a way that helps us attract more talent from across the country and around the world, that helps us keep more of our young people, our graduates here in the state, to go from brain drain to brain gain, and that certainly helps us attract more venture capital to help start up and scale up businesses grow here in the state of Wisconsin. So with that, we'll take questions on this, or obviously eventually anything else you want.
Terry? Governor, there's still a lot of consternation about whether the state is giving away too much to get these jobs.
I think the bottom line is every day from this day forward, this will increasingly become more popular as people see that they'll follow through on their commitment, as we will follow through on ours, not just in terms of tax incentives, but as I mentioned in my charge, to make sure that in our training and education systems across the state, we're capable of providing the kind of workforce that's needed to fulfill these good-paying, family-supporting jobs. And again, I think there are some, sadly, there were some detractors out there that really didn't want this to happen because they think it's a political victory of some sort. I think this is much bigger than a political victory or even the next couple of years in terms of an election cycle. This is really a generational thing that will transform the state of Wisconsin, particularly here in southeast Wisconsin. Theo?
It's been 7 weeks now since the man over your left shoulder said at a committee hearing that the site selection would be imminent, would happen within a couple of weeks. Can you bring us up to speed on that? Sure. Has the decision been made and it hasn't been announced yet?
Well, I think you're going to see our schedule is to sign this here today. You're going to have a contract ready to be signed the first week of October. It's up for Foxconn to make that announcement, and I believe that they'll probably make the announcement sometime between this date and the date of the contract signing. Again, that's up for Foxconn to announce. But again, they've been looking at sites obviously here in southeast Wisconsin, but we'll let them make the announcement.
With regards to like the forma with how TIF districts are formed, this is obviously using a TIF district, but we haven't really seen a cash flow forecast or anything along that line. But that's something that typically would happen at the municipal level. Mm-hmm. Has the state been working through some of those issues as far as the cash flow
sure.
and the viability of the project?
I'll let Secretary Neitzel talk because he's been handily involved in the discussions with all the local officials, both in Kenosha and Racine County.
Yeah, we've been in touch. We've worked very closely with the 2 local municipalities that have been competing for this. They are putting together their plan that will coordinate with ours, but we haven't dictated to the local community what they should or should not do. We just want to make sure that it's coordinated and that it works together to make sure that they're protected, the state's protected, and Foxconn is able to move forward.
So will the public be able to have access or to use those documents? Because that's actually usually the way it happens, but this is kind of a different situation.
Well, I think at the end of the day, they will have, the local community will have their agreement, which will be subject to the regular laws and kind of how it should happen, how it ordinarily happens. In the end, it will be another TIF agreement, just somewhat larger and probably more generational than some that you would see on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, the main, just to follow up on that, another next question. Yeah, the main impetus on this is the reminder is that the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation can do deals like this, but just not at this scale because no one ever envisioned when the laws were set that you'd ever have something of this magnitude. So it required us to go beyond the traditional format in terms of the size and scope of a deal with the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, but they do deals like this on a smaller scale routinely. They're typically driven by one of three or all three, or up to all three criteria, and that is support a financial incentive for capital investment, creation of new jobs, retention of existing jobs if it's an established company here in the state of Wisconsin. This was just bigger than anything we'd ever dealt with before, so the primary purpose for the special session bill, there are some other conditions included in that, was really to allow the state to do that. That doesn't take away from the ability of local, municipal, and county governments to do the sorts of things they would do for an economic development project here or anywhere else.
Is anyone from Foxconn here? And my other question is, when you were in South Korea, did you guys talk about your preparedness if there was some type of nuclear attack that hit the Midwest, God forbid, Wisconsin?
Okay, two different questions. One, people are not here for Foxconn today. They'll be joining us when we sign the contract because the contract, again, this legislation isn't a direct agreement with them. It's a change in the state law that allows the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation to enter into this agreement. So when they enter in and make it official, when we sign the contract, probably that first week of October, that's where Foxconn leaders will be there for that, and we'll be obviously signing that, making that public, and all the details of that at that time. In terms of the other part, we got to ask a lot. I mean, not only in the Republic of Korea, but we got to ask quite a bit in Japan. They're probably as concerned, if not more so. Unfortunately, people in Seoul and other parts of Korea are fairly accustomed to the threat of North Korea. Japan has been more recently introduced to that. Again, we saw it again just the other day. I actually was surprised. I had a meeting with the Prime Minister and thought it would be canceled because he was in the National Security Council not long after the missile went off into the ocean over the top of Japan. But all they did was delay it about 15, 20 minutes. He still met with me, which shows me just how important trade is between Korea and the United States, and obviously in particular Wisconsin, but just overall. They're very concerned about the free trade agreement, and they want to make sure that it's kept intact. It's something I personally feel very strongly we should continue to do. I appreciate the President's concerns about trade, but I think the Korean trade agreement with the United States is actually a good model if you want to have a level playing field, as the President and the administration's talked about before. That's a good model to do it because, good example, Harley-Davidson, a company from right here in Wisconsin, can actually enter into the Korean market and does reasonably well, whereas they have a challenge in other markets because of the tariffs included on that. So I think free trade ties in very much even to our joint security interest. We should obviously take the problems in North Korea very seriously. I don't view them as a direct threat to Wisconsin as much as they are a threat to our allies and to places like Guam. But just the fact that somebody's got access to these kind of weapons, this should be a concern to anybody, not only in the United States, but across the world.
We have time for two
Jason?
more questions.
Will there be any additional job requirements in the state's final agreement with Foxconn? And at the local level agreement, will there be any cash payment from those communities too?
Yeah, two different parts. One, we have latitude to put additional conditions in. I think particularly the language that was added after the Joint Finance Committee went it through the Senate and then was concurred on in the Assembly certainly gives Mark and his team some additional tools to even tighten up even more requirements about jobs. Not only the dollar amount, which we've already laid out in terms of the average annual salary, the $53,875 to be exact, plus benefits, but also any other conditions can be a part of that. So this isn't the final deal. That contract will be, so we feel pretty good. And what was the other part, Jason?
Just what are the local communities?
Oh, local, I'm sorry, yeah. Yeah, they'll, well, there again, much as the question was before on the tax incremental financing districts, it'll be up to them to put on the table what they want to do. Obviously, as you've had a couple different communities competing over the last couple months, they've been talking to Foxconn about things that they could offer, and that'll all have to be divulged when they put the offer on the table.
Where's WDC in their
with the underwriting, and then when's the board meeting?
You can talk about that, Mark. It's good.
Yeah, the underwriting process is ongoing right now, as is our drafting of the contract. We have a board meeting scheduled for September 28th, and that would be our goal to have that reviewed by our board, which is required, and have them reviewed and approval at the September 28th meeting. That's the plan right now. Obviously, this is a large company. We want to get it right. The company wants to get it right, and we will take whatever time it requires to make sure that the taxpayers in the state are protected, and the company's going to do the same thing for their investors.
Last step then for the contract is board approval. It doesn't need to go to the legislature.
No, because what, Todd, good question on that, because again, the reminder with this is something that routinely happens at the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. The reason we needed the law is because we didn't have the capacity under the law to offer as large of an incentive, because obviously we've never had something this big before, but routinely you get, for example, for Haribo, just down the way in Kenosha County, we had a contract like that earlier this spring. It's a great employer, first of its kind in North America. We're absolutely thrilled that Haribo is going to be here making the gummy bear makers of the world being here, probably not too far from the Jelly Belly distribution center. So there's some trend going on, I guess. But to your point about that, yeah, once the legislature is given approval to go up to these higher levels, and then it's the normal process of doing the underwriting, the board approval, and signing a contract.
What's your expectation of the number of jobs that would be offered that first year the plant is expected to be open in 2020?
Well, our tax incentives, our incentive package, are dependent on, for them to get the maximum amount, they have to provide the maximum number of jobs that we specify, which is the 13,000. If in that first year they're less than that, which again, probably have to talk more specifically to Foxconn officials as to their scale up, they would earn as they grow. So meaning if they start out with thousands of jobs but not 13,000, they'll get a prorated amount until they get to the 13,000. But we anticipate a large part of that's going to be dependent not just on the company, but on the charge I gave everybody at the end of my comments, which is a large part of it will be dependent on workforce. If they can hire up their workforce at an appropriate level, they'll probably be more aggressive in filling positions, which is why it's incumbent upon us, our technical college system, our worker training program, our University of Wisconsin system, our private colleges and universities, to make sure for the next several years that we not only have enough workers for them to hire to get to those higher levels, but that we don't miss a step with any other employer, big or small, like in the state. That to me is an equal challenge, I believe, what we are up to, but one that I'm mindful of, that we cannot, I want to emphasize, we cannot have this be a matter of taking jobs from some employers to fill others. This has got to be an overall gain to the workforce here in the state of Wisconsin, and we believe because of the transformational impact of this project, it will actually help us bring more talent into the state of Wisconsin, as well as retaining more of our graduates through our colleges and universities in the state. Great, thanks.